this on? Can you guys hear me? Yes. Hey, welcome to session 211, Create Metro-Style Apps Quickly with Built-in Controls. Thanks for coming. Hope you guys are all ready to have some fun and learn about controls. My name is Paul Gus Marino. Just a little bit about me. I've been at Microsoft for 9 years now, developing UI technologies. For the past year and a half or so, or maybe 2 years now, building controls. A lot of the stuff we'll talk about today. And before that, building a lot of the features you probably use every day if you use Windows Explorer or Search, or a lot of the features that are part of the Aero look and feel in Windows today. And I love programming. I'm super excited to be here and have you guys at this talk. I've been programming ever since I was a little kid in BASIC on my Apple II. If any of you guys ever did that. I've written native apps in Pascal, and then C, and then C++. I played with web development all the way from like Windows Mosaic in the beginning, in the early days, writing back-end stuff in Perl, CGI scripts, and then PHP, and then Python, and then ASP.NET. And I've done managed app stuff with Java and with C# and WPF while that was being developed. So really psyched to be here, and I'm really psyched to be able to talk to you guys about the controls that we're making available for you across all the languages that you might be wanting to use to make your apps today. So just to get a sense of where folks are coming from, how many of you guys saw the keynote yesterday and saw Jensen's presentation, big picture talk, and Alesha's big picture talk? Just about everyone saw that stuff? So you have a big kind of picture, at least about a bunch of stuff. How many of you guys this morning saw Sam Moreau's talk on design principles? Any folks see that? All right. Oh, a bunch of you. Good. In this room here. How many of you guys saw J.K. and Kai's talk on the touch language and touch kind of stuff? All right. Some of you guys have that context. How many of you guys were at Joe Stegman's talk on XAML? XAML overview? OK. Just to show hands, how many of you guys are coming? How many of you guys have done XAML development, know about XAML development? All right. How many of you guys have done HTML development, know about HTML development? Awesome. Great. Well, let's get started then. Where's my clicker? Here we go. Today, here's what we're going to cover. First, we're going to talk about what's new with controls in Windows 8. What's the big picture? What are the big things you should take away from today? Second, we're actually going to do a walkthrough of all the different built-in controls, kind of the smorgasbord of controls we have, what are their key features, and give you a picture of the things that are available for you to take advantage of in building your apps. And throughout the talk, we're going to show examples of getting started coding with the controls, both with HTML5 and JavaScript, and with XAML and C# in this particular talk. And so this talk applies to all developers, regardless of if you're using XAML or HTML. And you leave with a bunch of examples of ways to use the built-in controls in your apps. So let's get started with what's new with controls in Windows 8. Well, really, there are 4 things that you should kind of take away as the big picture here. The first one is there's a new and improved set of built-in controls. Some of these controls are concepts we've had in Windows for a long time that you and I are very familiar with, things like buttons and sliders. And these are concepts that we took the time to reimagine for Windows 8 to optimize for touch, to optimize for the Metro design language, and we have kind of new and improved versions of those controls for you in Windows 8. And some of the controls are wholly new concepts that you haven't had in the past in Windows, things like the semantic zoom and the app bar. And so we have a new and improved set of built-in controls that comprises both these new concepts like the semantic zoom and the app bar, and these new kind of reimagined concepts around buttons and slider and so forth. The second big thing you should take away from today is that the controls have been designed for touch, mouse, and keyboard. And so we thought about, in designing all the controls and how they would work, how to make them work well for users in a way that makes sense to them, whether they're using touch and how that's kind of natural and intuitive, whether they're using mouse and what's intuitive and natural to them there, and even for keyboard users and how to make it really efficient and great for keyboard users. And all that's built into the controls. And so we'll see through the examples that if you just use the controls, you get all of that for free. You don't have to worry about coding to all those different input methods and how you have to handle them. The third thing is that the controls fit into your app's look, yet preserve a common feel. When we thought about Metro-style apps, we really wanted to give you the whole canvas, all the pixels minus 1 for you to work with, and create your app and focus on whatever you want your app to be about. And in doing that, we really felt that you'd want to optimize it for the scenarios that your app is about, or maybe you have a certain look you want to have to your app because you like purple polka dots, so you want the purple polka dot look to your app, or whatever it is. And we want to let you do that. We want to let you create these great apps that represent your personality, your brand, your scenarios, your point of view in your app, but still have the controls with the common behaviors and experience and power in them. And so you'll see we built a lot of flexibility into the controls so you can fit them into your app and use them even in a multitude of scenarios and a multitude of styles and things like that. And finally, and the team back home is super excited about this point, we're making the controls available to you natively for HTML and natively for XAML. And I'll demonstrate through the talk what that means for you. And you guys have heard a bit about that. But really, from a developer experience perspective, it means that you can code against them in whatever language you know how to code in, that you want to code in, that you have existing code in or tools around or whatever. So you can use the skills you have, the tools you have, the code you have to start building these apps. But it also means there's an end user benefit here too, because there aren't plugins, there aren't abstractions, there aren't layers of interop and runtimes and things. So it's the full pedal-to-the-metal experience that end users get using your apps, using these controls, because they're built natively on the hardware-accelerated HTML5 stack and the hardware-accelerated XAML stack. So you get the maximum performance and the best user experience as well using the controls. So I just did a bunch of talking about these 4 big points. Let's actually see them in action in a demo. And we will switch to, not that computer, but this computer. All right, and let's open up the Build conference app to show these. So you guys all have this app on your devices. So when you launch the Build conference app, one of the first things you see front and center here is this listing of popular sessions. This is actually using the list view control. It's an example of one of the most popular controls you'll be seeing across applications is the list view control. And that's what this thing here right here is. And I can have a set of these tiles here and interact with them and so forth. A second control you probably noticed using this app is the app bar. So if you swipe your finger up from the edge, this bar comes up right here along the bottom. You guys see that? That's the app bar. And that has a bunch of secondary commands that are available on demand to you. The list view and the app bar, these 2 controls you see here, are 2 of those new and improved controls for Windows 8 and for Metro-style apps. And they're pretty quintessential controls. If you kind of step back and think about, hey, gosh, what's a quick thing I can do to make my app kind of feel like a Metro-style app? Using the list view and the app bar are probably 2 of those really quick ways to do that. So that's the first point, new and improved set of controls. The second thing I talked about is how they're optimized for touch, mouse, and keyboard. So let's demonstrate that. So with touch, so if you have a list of stuff, probably one of the first things you want to do is just be able to move around that list. And so with touch, the way you would think to do that is just to go and kind of pan it around. And so the list view supports that way of interacting with it. You can move your finger around, you have the little bounces and all that kind of stuff. If you're using the mouse, the way you kind of expect to do that is using the scroll bar. And so if I move my mouse over the view, a scroll bar appears, and I can scroll with the mouse. So for both mouse and for touch users, it's been optimized to work in a way that's natural and intuitive to them, efficient for them to use it. Let's look at how that works with interacting with the items too, because a list view isn't just about presenting some content, it's about interacting with that content. So if I hover over the items, I see this hover effect with my mouse. So I'm moving my mouse cursor over the items, and you see they get lit up. That's an important kind of sense of interactivity for users. They know that this is alive, this is interactive content. Tapping will do something, okay? Clicking will do something. And this is the way you expect, if you've used the mouse before, that things work with the mouse. You hover over them, and you get a hover feedback with the mouse. Well, what about with touch? Well, with touch, there's a standard way that touch feedback works in the touch language of Windows 8, and the list view control supports that. And let me demonstrate that. If I press down on an item, so I push my finger down on debugging connected Windows 8 apps. Do you guys see that? And it kind of looks like it gets pressed in. So part of the touch language of Windows 8 is that when you interact with something, you get that instant touch feedback. It also provides you a mechanism to cancel out. Because when I'm using my mouse, if I hover over something and I decide I don't want to click on that, I can just move my mouse away. Well, how does that work with touch? Well, it's simple. You put your finger down on it, and if you decide you don't want to do that thing, just move it off that thing and then lift your finger. If you lift your finger while you're on it, it'll open it. If you lift your finger while you're off it, it won't open it. And that's a common interaction pattern that the list view has built into it for interacting with the items. So using the list view, again, it works great for touch, works great for mouse in a way that's intuitive to users. But a lot of you guys, certainly I am a huge keyboard user, and the control works great with keyboard too. So I can tab into the control, whoops, and then you can just arrow around. Whoops, they changed it on me. OK, here we go. And you can arrow around with your arrow keys, up, down, left, right, so forth. You can hit Enter to open up an item and go into it. So it works efficiently with a keyboard the way you'd expect with the arrow keys, works with mouse, works with touch. All right, and that's an example with the list view control. So that's the second point I made about optimized for touch, mouse, and keyboard. The third point is how controls fit into the look of your app and still have those consistent behaviors. And so I want to show you 2 examples of that. The first one is just a visual example, and that's with the app bar. So in this app here, when I bring the app bar in, it's this gray app bar. And that's because this app has a kind of gray-green look to it. The guy who made this app said, oh, I want to have a gray-green look to my app, and so he picked to have a gray app bar. If you guys have played with it build, you'll have seen that some of the apps have blue app bars, and some of them have black app bars, and some of them have purple app bars if they want, or whatever. You can design exactly how you want to have your control look, but you have that common interaction experience about how it comes in that's familiar to a user. So an app can be styled visually to have whatever personality and feel it wants to have, but it still has that common interaction model of I swipe from the edge to get the app bar, and I can tap anywhere to dismiss it, for example. Okay? Another example like that is the back button here. So I want to make a point about this back button. It's not just an image. Sometimes people make apps and they just like plop a little image there and they say, oh, that's a button. But it's not a button, and people can tell the difference because they try to interact with them and they don't have the interaction if it's just a little image you plop there. So this is actually the button control that's been styled. And you can tell it is because when I hover over it, I get the hover feedback. So see how it turns gray? If I push down on it, I get the press feedback. If I slide off it, it cancels out. So I can have all those rich interactions, the touch language of Windows 8, just by using the standard button control and just styling it for the scenario. And you can see the controls support a lot of flexibility for these kinds of things. So that you can really use them in a lot of scenarios that you might not have initially anticipated you could. So that's how they fit into the look of your app and the scenarios of your app. And then the last point I wanted to highlight in this demo right here is how the controls are native for HTML and native for XAML. This particular app here was built in HTML. And that means that but all these points I make apply equally to XAML. That means everything about it is HTML. Everything about these little templates, these little representations of the items that you see here, those tiles where you see the title and the author and the little heart symbol, that's all just pure HTML. That's divs, that's CSS properties. This little heart is actually an input type equals check, the checkbox control in HTML that's been styled to look like a heart, and it's just embedded right in there. So it's just pure, straightforward HTML. There's no kind of weird plugins or interop or anything like that you're having to deal with. It's just pure HTML. And for XAML, it's the same exact thing. It's pure XAML. It's just all the language you know, the styling techniques you know, the way event handling works that you know. It all just works through and through. Let's dive into that point a bit more with a slide, because it's an important point to kind of take away. When we were designing the system, we said, hey, how do we make these? We have a set of controls we want to make available for people that embody the touch language and the Metro style and work great and are performant and all these things. We decided, hey, we should make them available natively to people in whatever language they're using. And you'll see in the build that we have near parity in the HTML and the XAML versions of the controls. For XAML, what we did is there was an established control model. So anyone who's programmed in XAML before knows there's a standard way in XAML of instantiating a control, setting properties on it, doing event handling on it, and so forth. And we've continued to move that forward. It's all the same. In fact, for controls that there's already an existing XAML control for, where possible, we just evolved that control. So button is button, for example. Okay? For some new controls that we added, like the semantic zoom or like the app bar, we followed that same model, but they're just new controls that are available in XAML. Now, when we looked at HTML, it was a more nuanced story, because it turns out in HTML, through standards and CSS, there are already kind of defined ways of exposing a lot of concepts to people. So there's already a button tag. There's already an input type equals text. There's already CSS overflow. And we actually found that for a lot of the control concepts we wanted to expose, we could expose them directly through those existing APIs. And so what we did is we actually implemented just great implementations of those HTML standards, great implementations of those CSS standards, right into the Trident rendering engine, to the HTML rendering engine of Windows. And so you have those available right through those HTML constructs that you already know and are using. And for some new control concepts that didn't really fit within that infrastructure, we're delivering them for HTML apps through the Windows library for JavaScript. And let me just take a moment to tell you guys what that's about. It's a kind of lightweight, pay-for-play JavaScript library that we're shipping with Windows 8 and making available as part of the developer story for Metro-style apps. When you go to VS and you do the new project template in HTML, you'll see there's some like CSS and JavaScript files included. That's the Windows library for JavaScript. That's what those things are. And it has a bunch of controls in it and a bunch of other utilities and things that help you make Metro-style apps. It's written entirely in JavaScript, so there's no kind of magic sauce to it when you're debugging or doing anything with it. It's just pure JavaScript, right on the same platform, the same engine, and so forth. And so a bunch of the controls, like the app bar and others, are delivered that way. All right, so let's look at some actual examples of the code just to kind of refresh ourselves on what this actually looks like. So here's a standard XAML kind of syntax that we have for the toggle switch, which is one of the new controls in Windows 8. So for those of you familiar with this, that first line where it says toggle switch, that's how you declare the control you want to have in your markup there. I want a toggle switch. That second line there where it says header equals Wi-Fi networking, that's defining a property on the control. So the control has a header property, and that follows the same model you see for properties on controls in general. Here it's just a plain text string. You could have done localization if you wanted to do localization using those APIs. For this demo here, I'm just using a plain text string. And then through the standard XAML mechanism, you can define a unique identifier on it, the xname my toggle. So that's how you can say, hey, this is the specific toggle in my UI. And then to do event handling on it, so if someone taps on the toggle or swipes on the toggle and you want to do something, use the standard XAML and C# or C++ mechanism to do event handling. So down the bottom there, in that line at the very bottom, it says my toggle.toggled. So that's the event it's firing, a toggled event. You add a new routed event handler that calls toggle Wi-Fi. That's this function you wrote that gets invoked whenever the toggled event is fired. Okay, so if you've used XAML before, this should be pretty familiar to you. And it's a new control, but it's following that same model. Let's look at the HTML version of the same control, which is one of the parts of the Windows JavaScript library, WinJS. Here's how that same exact thing works there for those of you who want to do an HTML. That first line is how you declare the control you want to use. So you say div data win control equals WinJS UI toggle, whatever the namespace is of the control you want to invoke. Then that second line is how you pass your parameters. You do the data win options, title, colon, Wi-Fi networking. That's just a JavaScript object. It's just a piece of JSON there. And use the standard HTML mechanism to define a unique identifier on this element. ID equals my toggle. So it's a standard thing you do in HTML. And then the event handling on it is also done in the standard way you do this kind of stuff in HTML. It's with an add event listener. So you can get a handle to the toggle object using the WinJS UI get control helper function. That's one of the different ways you could also just kept one around from your code wherever you wanted to. But that's one way to get one. You just add an event listener. It fires the change event, and then it calls your toggle Wi-Fi function. So the standard mechanism of event handling, these are native DOM events that you expect in HTML, works for the controls delivered that way, even the JavaScript ones. And it's kind of fun to go back and forth between these two, or I get excited about doing it and seeing how you can kind of do the same things. You can instantiate a control, you can set options on it, you can, sorry, I head too far, and you can put a unique identifier, and you can do event handling. Parity, XAML, HTML. All right. On top of all this, I want to say just another final kind of big picture kind of thing about the controls. There's a bunch of additional benefits you get. Because we're Microsoft and we're Windows, we have a certain set of standards to which we deliver all the features that we deliver, and you get the benefit of all these by using the controls. So that means they all implement accessibility, so they can work with screen readers and those types of tools. They all have world readiness built into them, so if you're in a left-to-right language or right-to-left language, like Hebrew or Arabic, they all kind of handle that processing correctly. They have crisp visuals built into them, so they scale at different DPIs automatically. They have a lot of performance optimizations in them and so forth. So using the controls, on top of everything else I've said, you kind of get these other kind of benefits to them. And really, we think for a lot of the common UI patterns in apps, they're really the best way to go about implementing them. So you can focus your time on the unique special thing that your app is doing and not on having to re-implement kind of common patterns over and over again. All right, so that's kind of a bit of a big picture on the controls. Now let's actually walk through and kind of look at all these controls we have and how they work and get some more demos going. Sorry. All right. So when we set out to figure out the set of controls to make, we did a lot of looking at what we called UI situations. We said, what are all the UI situations that people run into in designing their apps? And we came up with like gazillions of these things, because there are gazillions of scenarios you come up with in making apps. And we kind of categorized them in different ways and said, is it this way, or this way, or this way? And we came up with 5 categories that we thought were really common of kind of types of situations that we would focus on and deliver controls around. And so there probably will be some UI situations you'll run into that we don't have any control for. And then you're on your own to go invent some new UI for how to handle that case. But for a lot of very common cases, we've done a lot of thinking and research and development into a good pattern to use and built controls for that. And they fall into these kind of 5 categories we'll talk about today. Everyday widgets, text editing, scrolling content, presenting data, and commanding surfaces. And so let's go walk through them. All right, everyday widgets. This is the kind of the word we used for the set of all the little doodads and gadgets and gizmos that you kind of use all over your place in your apps, things that are represented on this slide. Buttons and combo boxes and sliders and progress bars and progress rings and toggle switches and checkboxes and so forth. And we have this is the set of everyday widgets that we're making available. There's quite a lot of power in them. Some of these are familiar concepts. Some of them are a little bit newer. They've all been optimized with all those different things I said, for touch, for mouse, for keyboard, with performance, with fast and fluid animations. You can see that with the progress ring and the way it kind of has that really cool little way of spinning you may have noticed or not so far. But one of the things we thought was kind of fun is actually we had this internal app building kind of effort with our interns and stuff that Stephen talked about in the keynote. And it was fun to see different ways people actually use the controls because there's so much flexibility built into them. We took some screenshots of that, and that's this slide here. Oh. And so it's kind of fun to see there's kind of the default look and the default kind of things that are there, but there's actually a lot more than you might think behind the scenes there in terms of the power you can do to use those same controls in a lot of different scenarios, in a lot of different ways, and style them to look cool and fun and various kinds of things. So it's kind of before and after kind of stuff. But really the best way to experience controls is with a live kind of app demo as opposed to PowerPoint slides. So let's go and do that. And I'm going to show you one of the SDK samples, and I'm going to take this opportunity to plug the SDK samples. Really, the best way for you to figure out right away and how to use the controls and how to code them most easily, I think, is the SDK samples. Go install the SDK samples, open them up, copy and paste the code out of them. They show a lot of examples of patterns to use and so forth. Little plug for the SDK samples. Here's one of the many SDK samples we have around controls. And this one covers a bunch of the kind of basic controls available in HTML. There's YAML versions like this, too. And one of the first things I'm going to do, I'm just going to change the style sheet just because I think it projects better with light. But that also illustrates the point that all the controls we're making available with two styles by default for you. So there's a dark style and a light style. So if you have a lighter kind of looking app, you can start with the light style, and you can incrementally style over that. If you have a darker looking app, you can start with the dark style and incrementally style over that. So it's your call. It doesn't mean it has to be black and white. You can do dark blue or whatever you want to do. But those are two starting points that we're giving you with the controls. And then in this sample here, you see kind of a bunch of the controls here. I'm just going to highlight a couple of them that are kind of fun to talk about. One is the combo box, which is select control for you guys in HTML. And here are a couple of things we've done there to optimize that for touch. So one of the things you'll see is we kind of made it a little bit bigger, kind of the visuals of it, so it's a little easier to tap with your finger. There's a cool new animation as it kind of comes in that feels fast and fluid. And you can just go and tap and pick different fruits here. So I picked grape or watermelon or whatever. So it's really easy and lightweight. It's fast. Because it shows up centered, there's less movement you have to do to actually get to your target in general. It's really, really nice and easy to use with touch. But we didn't sacrifice keyboard or anything else for that. So you can type the letter A to jump up to A or P to jump to P. Like all those shortcuts you're used to with your keyboard all work as well. Then another cool thing is if you have a longer list with touch, if you tap on it, we actually have something called carouseling that goes on in the combo box. So here's the set of the states, and I can go through them A to Z or Z to A. So I don't have to go all the way to the bottom of the list to get to a state that comes late alphabetically. I can go through them this way, or I can go through them this way, and I can go and I can stop at Washington, my home state, for example, very easily. So that's carouseling. It's one of the features built right into the combo box you can take advantage of. And it's automatic. Just if you have enough items in there that we think it's right to start carouseling, we start doing that. And that also helps with the placement of stuff so that even if you're placed at the top, the control shows up overlaid over the thing. So it has a nice animation and stuff because of that. So that's the combo box. Another one that's kind of fun to look at is the slider control. And so here I want to emphasize the flexibility the controls have. So as you might expect, you can put a slider control that goes side to side. You can put one that goes up and down. You might not expect, but you can actually customize the places where it can stop. So maybe you want to say, oh, I only accept the values 0, 4, 8, and 12. And so you can set it up that way. And if someone tries to stop in between, it'll snap to one of those values for you. So you can do that kind of thing. If you want to, you can do the opposite. You can say, no, I want the continuous range from 0 to 100. And you can do the continuous range. And with all of these, you can style them in various ways. You can do a red one. You can move your tick marks around. You can get rid of that tooltip if you don't want the tooltip. You can do something totally custom looking, all that stuff. But as you do so, you get the same interaction model, the same behaviors that we built into the controls that users will expect. And so let me show you two examples of that. One of the things we found in usability is that people aren't always perfectly anal about getting things exactly right. So if I'm using this slider here, some people are really good about staying on the line, and they're perfectly moving over the line. But some people are sloppy, and they move off the line. But the control supports that. So even if you move off the line, it continues to keep track of where you were kind of touching, what's the logical place, and it keeps moving the control. And so even if you style the control, so here I styled in this wacky case here, it continues to have that feature. So no matter the styling, the flexibility, the things you do with the controls, you can put it vertical, horizontal, et cetera. All those things you do, you get those same interactions built into them. Another example is we found in usability, some people just like to tap. They just like to go tap, tap. And they don't even like to slide. They just like to tap there, and the control supports that too. So all the kind of nuanced, details, behaviors, we've kind of built right into the control. So you just use that, and you get all of that for free, even if you style and build on top of that. And that's with touch and with mouse and so forth. So those are two examples. There's a bunch of these everyday widget controls. Those are just two examples to kind of whet your appetite and show you the kinds of things that are possible there. So let's go back to the slide deck to recap that real quick. The everyday widgets. Hey, use the everyday widgets to get a great user experience. We did a lot of work to kind of build that into them. Take full advantage. Oh, there's one more thing I didn't show you. I got to show you my other demo. Hold on. There's one other thing that someone on the team did with the slider that was kind of cool that I wanted to show you guys, which was someone just put together a little multi-touch equalizer, and this is kind of fun. So because the controls have all been built to be optimized with touch, you can actually just kind of glue them together really easily to make a pretty fun little multi-touch experience. So I can grab one slider and start moving that, and you see the little line that's kind of connecting the finger, but I can simultaneously go and grab a second slider. Okay, so because we support multi-touch, you can grab, and you can like do crazy things. You can like cross the lines here and like keep moving them, and like you can have like a ball. In fact, you can have like the whole family can play in here, because like if you have screen supports enough touch points, you guys can all go and like have fun. The kids, the whole family, just get around the computer and like go crazy with an equalizer. And that was like super simple. It was just like put like 8 sliders down. Like that was it. If you think about all the work you'd have to ordinarily have done to create a multi-touch experience like that and listen to all these touch points and capture them and so forth, it's just so simple. Using the controls, just like plop them together, and you can make a pretty fun multi-touch experience. It takes advantage of the system, and it's kind of pretty cool. So I want to show you guys that. That was really fun. Someone on the team made that, and I wanted to show that. And it's in the SDK sample, so you can go see how it's done. So take full advantage of multi-touch screens using the controls. And then, hey, they're highly flexible. You can really style them, customize them a lot to fit your needs, but you still get the same interactions, the same behaviors, really this great quality, and you get a really polished feeling app. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is text editing. When we thought about the next scenario people have in apps, it's text editing. This is super common in all types of apps. It can be a game, and you're entering like your name for the high score screen. It can be some shopping app, and you're entering comments about some product to review it. It can be a productivity app, and like the whole screen is some giant text box that you're like typing into. Text editing is in all types of apps. And Windows has always had a strong text editing experience. People have generally thought of Windows as this great productivity platform, this great text editing experience there. And so for Windows 8, we thought about how could we reimagine this for these modern scenarios? How could we reimagine it with touch and create really an even better text editing experience, continue to move that forward, but make that available to everyone to use as part of the platform in the controls. And let me show you what we've done. So we have a set of text editing controls. We've got a plain text box in a single line mode and a multi-line mode. We've also got a password box, and we've got a rich text box. The rich text box, you can take advantage of the typographic features of Windows and have different font faces and font sizes and font widths and colors and all that kind of stuff. In the plain text boxes, it's just plain Unicode text. One of the things we've done just on the control level itself is we've added this clear button to the single text box. So just in a single tap, you can clear the box. You don't have to select the text and delete. So that makes it really easy with touch. In a lot of scenarios, you just want to kind of clear the text. And that's there. Then on top of kind of this kind of stuff that's done at the control level, there's a lot of behaviors that are built into the text editing, built into all those controls. So the first one of those is text selection. So you guys know how to select text with mouse and keyboard. In Windows 8, you can select it with touch in a really great way. And that experience is built into all the text controls for free. So just use the text controls, and you get this great text selection experience. And I'll demonstrate that with touch. You also get, as you would expect, this is Windows after all, cut, copy, paste is there, of course. And that works great with selection. And as people said yesterday, we've got spell checking. And that's built into all the text controls for you. And it's actually a really great spell checking experience. We're like pros at Microsoft at making spell checking. And so like it's not like a V1 spell checking. It's got like add to dictionary and ignore and like all these fancy things. It's got autocomplete. I'll show you this stuff. But it's a really great text spell checking experience. And it's built into all the text controls. And on top of all that, we've also got really great integration into the soft keyboard, the touch keyboard. So if you use any of the text controls, automatically, if you tap into them, the touch keyboard comes up, and the system knows to reposition things. You can extend that even further. You can hint at what type of input you're asking for, and we'll show the right touch keyboard. Because with a touch keyboard, unlike a hardware keyboard, we can change the keys around to like whatever we think it makes sense. And so if you tell us you're entering a number, we'll show the number pad. If you tell us you're entering an email address, we'll show the little @ sign, the .com button. So you get the right touch keyboard, and you can do that as a developer. So let's get into a demo of the text editing controls. And we'll do that again with the Build Conference app. And so you guys can follow along at home. By the way, every single demo I'm doing today is on things that you have. So every app I'm showing is an app that you have on the box. Every SDK sample I'm showing is an SDK sample that's available from the Dev Center for you to use and download and see the code of. So there's nothing I'm showing you that you can't yourselves go and do right after the session and play with yourselves. So let's just go into some session here, and here's a big text box on the notes screen, and I'll start typing. So I'm going to type this. So you notice I tapped, soft keyboard comes up, it adjusts the space there, and I'm going to type the phrase, welcome to build. And the first thing I'm going to show in this is what we call input suggestions. So when you're typing with a soft keyboard, it guesses what you're about to type, and it predicts it for you, and you can very easily just kind of get that input into there. So watch as it's fast, so that's why I had to tell you before I do it. All right, so welcome. Oh, it says welcome. I can hit insert, and I just put that word in there. So as I'm typing, it's very quickly completing words for me. Makes it very efficient to enter text with the keyboard. Welcome to the, I can hold down the shift key if I want to type all caps, build. And I'm going to type conference, and I'm going to misspell it. And by the way, this took me a long time to figure out how to get a misspelled word in, because the soft keyboard is so good at like auto-predicting stuff. But I found a way to do it, how to trick it. Conferency. All right. Oh, no, I misspelled the word conference. Well, I can tap on it, and I get the context menu. You can see, by the way, it's a touch-optimized context menu, so I can do what we call scrubbing on it to pick the right word. And voila, I've typed my phrase. So welcome to the Build Conference. Great. So that was input suggestions, spell checking, all built right into the text controls for you. And just use the text controls, and you get that. Another thing you get is the touch text selection. Let's look at that. So you just tap on a word, and you see this little handle shows up, that little blue circle. And then you just grab from there to drag to make your selection. So I want to grab, this. So I've made that selection with touch. So you just tap, get a little blue ball, you drag it to get the selection you want. I can tap on it again, that selection to cut. And so that's how simple it was to select and cut some text. I can tap again. I get the little gripper handle. I can just tap on it, and I can do paste. So very simple with touch, very natural. Just tap, drag, do your selection, cut, copy, right built into there. Welcome to the build. We're going to type build great apps. Whoops. Little message to everybody. All right. And then I wanted to show you also, because touch is awesome, but a lot of us are going to use our hardware keyboards to type stuff too. We're going to be sitting there programming at our desktops with Windows 8 as well, and that works awesome too. So I'm going to switch to my keyboard for a second. And show you auto correction. I thought, so I'm going to misspell thought for a second. You guys catch that? We're watching, spacebar. Auto correction is built in. I thought I'd show you keyboard. And as you'd expect, all those keyboard shortcuts work as well. So you can do things like Control, Shift, left arrow to select the previous word. You guys know about all this stuff. You can do Control-A to select all. You can do Control, Shift, down to select the whole line. All the keyboard shortcuts you know and love are also built all into all the text controls. So all you power users can go and party on and have fun typing into text boxes. Works great with touch. Works great with keyboard. Kind of everything you kind of would expect there. All right. And then I'm going to show you two other things. Back to the SDK sample with text input. One is that point I made about the text boxes being optimized for different keyboards. So here's a plain text box, and you see the regular keyboard. This next one here, we said it's a number, and I get the numeric keyboard. This one here, I said it's an email, and we get the email keyboard. So you get the right type of keyboard for each scenario. I also want to take the opportunity just to highlight, if you have a pen, which you guys do with your devices, this is a great way to, all the text, because they connect to the soft keyboard, they also connect to the pen input panel automatically. So I can type, and I can switch to pen, and I can type something like 1, 2, 3, and insert, and I can get that into the text field too. So pen input also is built right in there, handwriting recognition, right into the text controls. Just use the text controls, and you get like all this amazing power. It's pretty cool. Okay, and then one final thing is about styling. So I told you guys about styling, and so you can style the text controls too, and this is a red one, and I can type into this, and you see you still have the clear button, for example, and all that stuff, and it's pink because this person wanted to make it pink. But we've actually built a lot of cool styling and special effects features into HTML this release and into XAML, and because the controls are native elements in both of those languages, you can take advantage of those on top of the controls, and so you can do cool things like someone in the team thought it would be fun to do a movie effect with a text box, and so here's a text box with a movie effect, but I want to point out this isn't just like some post-production effect or something, it's a real interactive control. Like I can go in here and I can select text, and I can delete, and I can type, and I can even misspell a word like welcome, and I can right-click and spell it correctly. So that whole experience is there, even if you do all these cool special effects and stuff. Now, I'm not urging you all to make everything look like a movie trailer in your apps, but you can. So take advantage of kind of the capabilities of the platform and with the controls like that. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint and recap what we just looked at. We just looked at text controls. We said, wow, there's this powerful text editing experience. We showed you a lot of the features that you get with that. That's for free, built into the text controls. If you use them, we showed how they're optimized for touch, mouse, and keyboard. We showed spell checking and the whole rich experience around that, and integration with the touch keyboard, and some of the cool things you can do with styling on them. So that's text controls. All right, next area of controls is scrolling content. One of the really common things you have in an app is a bunch of content that you want to let the user scroll through. Maybe it's a picture. You have a photo editing app, and you want to let them zoom around and pan around a picture. Maybe it's just some kind of a blogging, reading app, and you just have textual content. Maybe you have videos. Whatever content you have, super common thing you got to do is let someone pan around that content, move around that content. And we spent quite a bit of time for Windows 8 thinking about what's a great way to let people pan around, scroll around content with touch, with mouse, with keyboard. And we kind of built this whole experience around that, and we built it right into the scroll view controls that we're making available for you to use in your applications. So let's take a look at that. So the scroll view control, some of the principles you heard people talk about if you went to Sam's talk this morning or Jensen's talk yesterday was content, not Chrome. And so that's actually embodied by the scroll view control, because in the idle state, we don't show you any extra Chrome. There's no scroll bars or widgets or other things kind of in the way of the user and their content. So you get all the pixels to use to show your content. And we think that's really great. In the idle state, that's what you see, no scroll bars and things. If you start panning with touch or using the keyboard to move around, you get the panning indicator. And that's this little lightweight bar. It still shows you how far along you are in the content, how much content you're looking at relatively to the whole set of content. So you still have that context as a user, but it's very lightweight. It's not really in the way. It just comes and appears as you're kind of panning and using it with touch. And then if you want to use mouse, you get the full-fledged scroll bar and all the power of the scroll bar. You can grab the scroll thumb and move to the front, to the end. You can tap in the track to move by page. You can click on the arrows. All those capabilities you expect with the scroll bar there. It actually appears hovered over the content. It's like an auto-hiding kind of thing. And if you want to, that's great to do it that way. If you want to reserve some margin in your content, you can do that too. It's up to you as the developer how you want to do that behavior there. But you get that experience. But this just paints kind of a visual picture over it, but there's a lot more to the experience of scrolling and panning content in Windows 8. Some of the things, and I'll demo this, but some of the things to be aware of is, first, there's a lot of work that's done in the panning experience itself to make it really stick to your finger. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes there, and I think you'll appreciate that and see that as you play with it. There's zooming capability built into the scroll view controls, and it's pretty nifty zooming capability. It's not just taking a picture of the content and stretching it up, but it actually does re-render the fully interactive content after a zoom, so you have a really powerful experience you can do there, and I'll show you that. It has something called Rails, so that's a technology that makes it so that if you're moving and your finger isn't steady, we still scroll the content in a steady way. You don't have to have a steady hand necessarily to scroll content in a steady way. There's inertia and those boundary effects so that you can kind of flip through content more quickly, and so you know when you're at the edges. There's this thing called snap points, which let you demarcate certain points in your content that you want it to naturally snap to, and I'll show you that. And there's also things like nesting and chaining. So these are fancier scenarios, but imagine you have some horizontally scrolling content inside of vertically scrolling content. Like, how's that supposed to work? Well, the controls have default behaviors for that, and they support those kinds of scenarios and give you a lot of control over that as well. So let's go and demo these. And the first app we're going to use to demo this is the app called Memories. This is an app that's built in XAML, and it lets you have these kind of life books and pan around them. So we'll open up this one here. All right. So this kind of life book is a kind of interactive multimedia thing. You got pictures here, you got text in various styles, you have live video, and this developer wanted to let the users pan through the content, and they just used a scroll view control. And you can see the video is playing, but it's very smooth. It keeps up with my finger, even though I have the video playing and the text and the images. I can do inertia, I can do bouncing, I can do all that kind of stuff, and I get the great experience nonetheless. So, and the video is still playing. Yep, there it is. Okay. And you can also see I can be sloppy about it. So I can not move my finger perfectly straight. I can kind of move it like at an angle or like all silly and crazy, and it still works smoothly. We detect the right angle of movement that you're doing. So that's the scroll view control, and it's a great, just get that great rich experience for moving through your content. And then if I use my mouse, the scroll bar shows up, and I can scroll with the mouse, and I can jump to the end quickly, and so forth. So that's panning with the scroll view control. Now let's look at it with zooming. And to show you that, I'm going to show you an app that one of our summer interns built called Measure It. This is a neat little app that lets you take measurements of a photo, for example, of a room or something like that. So I'm going to say that I want to draw a blue rectangle here. Rectangle, all right? And I'm just going to draw a little blue rectangle onto these cushions to measure them, and kind of computes the measurements there. So, gosh, I didn't really get the corners of those cushions right. Can you see how I kind of missed it? Because I'm not perfect, I'm just a human being. Well, probably what the app author wanted to do is let someone zoom in to fix that, and using the scroll view, it was very easy for them to do that. So I can just put 2 fingers down, zoom in there, I can tap on this and be like, oh yeah, let me adjust that there, let me go over here, just this side here, is that just perfect? Great, and I can tap away and zoom out, and that was all done by the scroll view control. And something I wanted you to notice is actually, as I zoomed in there, stuff is still rendered in high fidelity. It's not just some picture some optical effect to. It's the full content, and it's fully interactive. So I can go here, and I can tap into this, and I can select this text, and I can go and I can edit this, all that kind of stuff. So it's fully interactive even as you zoom. So that's zooming, and that's another thing the scroll view control lets you do that you might want to take advantage of in your applications. Okay, and then the last thing I want to show you is snapping. And so we'll look at the aircraft app to demo that. This is another one of the apps you have installed. You saw this yesterday. It lets you make these paper airplanes and color them and print out instructions about how to make them. The author of this app had these instruction sheets here, and they didn't want to have it. They wanted it to be that when you were panning through it, it never had something cut off. They didn't like that. They said, hey, I don't want an instruction ever half cut off. I want it to always land such that the instruction is fully on screen or not on screen. And so they were able to do that using snap points. Using snap points, you can mark positions and content that you want the view to be snapped to, and then the system will automatically handle making sure that when you pan, it kind of lands at one of those points. And so here, you can do kind of gross gestures like big flicks, and you'll see it'll land kind of always at one of those snap points, or you can do small, delicate movements, and it'll also land at one of those snap points. So snap points, that's another feature available to you through the scroll views. So getting back to our deck, to recap what we just talked about, we talked about scrolling content and the controls we built around that. You get a really great user experience using the built-in scroll views with a lot of features around scrolling and zooming and snapping and so forth. We saw how it works with touch, mouse, and keyboard, the stick-to-the-finger performance. I just wanted to make a note about how to access this functionality. If you're using XAML, it's the scroll view control. If you're using HTML, it's actually the CSS overflow property, which you might be familiar with. So you do like overflow auto, for example. And there's some extensions to that that have been done for these other things like zooming and snapping and so forth. And you can learn about those in the Dev Center or the talk immediately after this talk in this room on HTML5 touch stuff. All right. So we talked about text. We talked about everyday widgets. We talked about scrolling content. Now it's about presenting data. This is a very important type of content that people have in applications. We thought a lot about this one. So very often you have scenarios, and you have this in all sorts of applications, where a user has a set of content that maybe came from a database, for example, that they need to see and be able to interact with and work with. It could be a note-taking app, and you have a set of notes, and the user wants to delete notes or add or remove notes, just present them. Again, it could be the high score screen in a game. It could be some content management system or a CRM program, and you have records of customer data you need to present. Presenting data is a very, very common scenario in a wide variety of applications. And we wanted to have a good experience for this, for metro-style apps, and make that available to you through some controls. And so let's talk about the ones we have here. So there really are three primary controls around presenting data. The list view, the grid view, and the flip view. The main one of these, and the one in the middle there, is the grid view. And so you've seen this in a lot of the demos over the, yesterday for sure, where you have a kind of a big screen where you have kind of a grid of content that you can kind of pan left and right through. And that's what the grid view lets you do. It lets you take a set of data, template it, and present it in a scrolling grid, left to right scrolling. And that's really the right control to use when it's like the main thing that's going on in your app is I'm showing you a bunch of content, a bunch of data. The list view is a control that's great to use when you have some data you want to show on screen, but it's not like the whole screen. So for example, let's say you're a mail app, and you want to show reading pane, but you also want to have like the list of mail messages. List view is a good thing to use for that scenario. List view is also a great thing to use when you're in a snap state, and you only have those 320 pixels to show your data. And finally, we've got the flip view. And the flip view is a control to use for kind of a one-up presentation of data. So if I have, I don't know, some long list of movies with information about them, and I want to show the user one at a time, flip view is a great way to do that. And all these controls have a bunch of kind of richness that comes along with them. So if you use the list view or the grid view, for example, they have a bunch of layout features such as grouping or dynamic layout, so they'll fit to the space you give them. So that really makes it easy to handle those different sized monitors, for example. Use a grid view, and it'll put 3 rows or 4 rows or 5 rows, depending on how much space you have, for example. And you can do these kind of grouped layouts with it, like you saw on the start screen, that kind of create information hierarchy for the user, so they can kind of more easily see the content and view it. They also have a bunch of features around selection and interactions around that built into them. And selection is very important, and we did a lot of thinking about that, and there's a unique gesture for how you select items in Windows 8, and the controls build that into them. So if you use the grid view or the list view, you get the selection behaviors built right into that, and I'll demo that for you. And you also get things like fast and fluid animations built into them for common things. So items getting added, items getting removed, reordering, all those kinds of things. You get some nice fast fluid animations and things built into the controls for that. So that's list view, grid view, and flip view. And there's one other very important control around presenting data, and that's the semantic zoom control. And this is a control. The scenario here is sometimes you have so much data that it's really tedious for a user to kind of like pan through all the data. And so the semantic zoom control makes it easy for you to set up 2 views of the data, a kind of a higher level view and a deeper view of the data, so that if that deep view of the data has, let's say, for example, 1,000 people in it, okay? Like, look at the Build app and like all the attendees listed in the people view of it, okay? That's a lot of people to scroll through. So maybe you just want to zoom up and just see the letters that represent, P, A, B, C, D, and then jump to the P's, for example, to find me, Paul, or whatever. And so semantic zoom is a control we have that lets you set up these 2 views, connect them, and do that. And we'll show you some examples of that. Let's do it. All right, so first, flip view. So if, an app I kind of think is fun that uses flip view is an app called Flashcards that you also have on your system. Let's find it. Here it is. And this app here, basically they have a bunch of little data sets. They have a set of numbers, a set of colors, a set of animals, a set of landmarks that they wanted to present to kids in a fun way to learn about these different sets of data in a kind of one-up presentation. And so they used the flip view to do it. So let's go click on animals, rabbit, and turtle, and shark, and so forth. They had this kind of set of data. You can see there's more information about each item, actually. So I tap there, and I get this different view on it. And you can see everything has an image. It has where it lives, what it eats, some fun facts, this kind of templated data about each record in their data set. And the flip view control lets them see in a one-up presentation where it's still direct manipulation, but it uses the snap points to let you snap through one at a time. So it's kind of a one-up view. And it also works with mouse. So you can move your mouse, and you get these little arrows, and you can click on the arrows and go forward and back and so forth. So the flip view is a great little control to use for this one-up presentation of data. It supports virtualization. It pulls from your data, so it's efficient. You don't have to actually create a gazillion elements in your UI tree to do this. And that's the flip view control. All right. The second control we're going to show, second example, is with the News app, and that's right here. And this is the add feed screen in the News app. So this is using this is an HTML list view. It's the same as grid view in XAML. And you can see here that I have kind of the set of these news feeds. Again, they're virtualized, so we didn't have to go and create all the UI for all of them. It dynamically creates them on the fly as you pan around. You can see it has a nice layout to it. It uses grouping. That's one of the features there, so it kind of presents the content in a nice way. And one of the things they had to do in this app is they needed to support selection. So let's look at that. So something you may have seen, so those of you who went to Kai and JK's talk saw kind of some of the background about why we have the selection model. So I'm not going to go into the details of that, but you should watch that video if you want to understand the background behind it. But in short, in Windows 8, you can always select by doing a swipe in the opposite direction of the direction of panning. So here I'm panning left and right, and so if I go in an item and I swipe up and down, I can select it. This creates a consistent model for users they can count on to know how they can always select things in applications. And if you use the grid view, you get that built in. So you just say, oh, I want to have selection, and you'll have the swipe to select behavior. And so it's very easy to go and multi-select a bunch of things. I can swipe them again to unselect them, and so forth. So selection is one of the things you get kind of for free using the view controls. There's actually a bunch of different interaction models that we support. If your app is only doing selection, if that's the only thing it does, then it's great to just do tap to select also. That's fine. But you should always have cross-slide selecting, the swipe selecting. And sometimes your app will do something else on tap. For example, if I were to add this blog here, you'll see that in this view here, tapping jumps into the article. And so how does the user select? Well, they can go back to the reliable mechanism. They know that cross-sliding always selects. And it brings up the app bar, and they can do commands on the selection. All right? So that's showing the grid view and selection and some of the things you can do with that control there. It's a very common pattern, so good thing to know about. Now let's look at another app. We'll look at the Memories app again. And here we'll talk about some of those kinds of animations and dynamic interactions. Whoops, not the app I wanted. Memories. All right, so I showed you the scrolling here, but let's say I wanted to rearrange these screens in this app. I bring up the app bar, edit, and I say reorder pages. And so here now they presented this data in a grid view. And what you can see here is some of the built-in interactions that exist for deleting items and reordering items and the animations you get for free. So let's say in this deck here I decided, you know what, I don't like this slide here anymore. So I can select it with the same cross-slide thing. I can hit delete. It gets deleted, and I get a nice, fast and fluid animation with that deletion, so I can see kind of what happened there as a user. And that's built right into the control. This app here is a XAML app, just to show that the News app was an HTML app, so this kind of parity here going on. The other thing you can do is reorder. So I can go and I can grab this, I drag it down past a certain point. You see it kind of goes into this rearrange mode, and I can move it somewhere else, and then you see things get rearranged, and there's a little animation with that too. So all that kind of capability is built right into the control for you to take advantage of. All right, and now I want to show semantic zoom. And I know there have been some questions about semantic zoom people have had. So I think a great app that shows it to use is the Build Conference app, actually. So that's a great app that shows the usage of the control that you guys all have in your hands. And so I'm going to go to some different sections to show that. So first, let's go to the schedule. So you can see we've got a lot of events going on at Build. There's a long schedule. It'll take me a long time to scroll through the whole thing. So I can just go and I can pinch, and I get out to this other view of the data. And you can see that they picked an appropriate view for the data. So it wasn't like they just showed, I don't know, little pictures of the dates scrunched up or something. They said, hey, what's an appropriate way to show this information at a higher level? It's actually just another grid view, by the way, with group headers here. But you can kind of get to the schedule easily. I can jump to 3:30 on Wednesday, which is the time of this session here. I can zoom back into there. So it's very easy as a user, if you use the semantic zoom control, to let them get around a large set of content with touch. It's not just for touch, though. It does work with mouse and keyboard. It's a control minus key will zoom you out. Control plus key will zoom you in. If you control mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out with your mouse. So again, this stuff all works with mouse and keyboard as well. But it's something that's especially useful with touch. But this is one view that was done in this specific view of the app. But let me show you. Yeah, OK. But let's go to the people view now in the same app. And here, they thought a different presentation made sense. So here's the people again. Gosh, I'm scrolling, and I'm still in the atoms. It's going to take me a while to get all the way to Paul. So I can go and I can pinch again, zoom out. And here they did this representation of the data at the outer level. I can click on P to get into the Ps. I think you get the idea. Semantic zoom control lets you build these kinds of scenarios in a consistent kind of way. So let's go back to the deck now and just talk a little bit again about the programming model here. because you saw a lot of different views, and you saw the data was represented in different ways in all those views. But I wanted to emphasize again, it's done in a way that you're in control of as the developer, and you can really template the data however you want to template it, and there's a lot of richness there. So this is an example of the data templating with HTML. And actually, is this the right order? Hold on. Yeah, OK. I'll do the HTML one first. So you see in the bottom there, I have my list view that I've created, data win control equals winjs.ui.listView. And then one of the options I passed it was item renderer my template. And then up above is just a blob of HTML, which is that template. And you can see that in that template, I was able to include an image. In that template, I was able to include a button. So you include interactive elements inside your templates, too. So you can have a little heart, for example, inside the item that can be clicked on separately from the main item itself. And so this is the example in HTML. And we have the same exact thing in XAML. You can pass it a template. That template itself is a pure chunk of XAML. You can put images in there. You can put buttons in there, and so forth. So you have a really rich ability to present data, and you have a lot of control about how you do that, because it's just pure XAML and HTML for you to go and party with. I will say a note of, be careful about how complicated and fancy you make those things. Like, people will probably prefer them if they're pretty straightforward, but you have a lot of power there. So just quick takeaways. This is a really visible way to make your app shine with the Metro design style. You get consistent interaction model and behaviors. Use the list and the grid views for collections of data. You define your own templates. You can connect them to lots of data sources, and I'll, at the end of the talk, give you some pointers to where you can learn more about that. And use the semantic zoom control when you have a larger set of data that you want to make easy to navigate around. All right, and finally, I want to talk about a very, very important set of controls around commanding surfaces. So far, a lot of what we talked about is stuff that you might want to have in the main area of your app, because the whole design philosophy of Metro-style apps is that the apps focus on the content they're about, and there's not a lot of Chrome and a lot of other UI widgets in the way. So we want to let you make those great apps that are really focused on being great at whatever you're great at. But we still need to have in apps commands and secondary actions that are going on. And we thought a lot about what's a good way to present that to users that has a great interaction model for them. And we created a bunch of controls to encapsulate that. And those are here on this slide here. So the first one of those you've heard quite a bit about probably is the app bar. That's probably the most quintessential of these controls that you should really be aware of and be taking advantage of in your app. But there's a number of other ones. I won't go into detail on all of them in today's session, but there's some other sessions that touch on things like the settings pane. But there's the app bar, the flyout. Those are two we'll dive into the most. There's also a tooltip. I showed you context menu before in another context. On message dialogues, the only thing I'll tell you is those are modal blocking things. So only use them if you're really modal and blocking. Don't just throw them up willy-nilly. All right. So let's do some demos to show the usage of these and what you can do with them. So we're going to use the NoteSpace app now. This is an app, another one of the apps the interns wrote that lets you take notes. And you can take ink notes and images and textual notes. And so you want to have some commands here to create notes and do things. And so you just swipe from the edge to get the app bar. Again, it works with mouse and keyboard too. So the mouse way is just right-click in the background. That's how you get the app bar. And the keyboard way is the Win key Z. That's the way to toggle that in and out. And that's consistent across all apps. If you use the app bar, you get for free the invocation mechanism. So you don't have to worry about hooking that up yourself. Likewise, there's a consistent dismiss model, which is just tap away to dismiss. You get that for free using the app bar. So just use the app bar, you get all these interactions about how it comes in and goes away the right way. OK, when you're using it, you have a lot of flexibility to make it contextual. Because we didn't give you like 30 rows of buttons, that's probably not what you should do. You should probably show the contextually appropriate commands. And so an example of that in this app here is if I go and I create a new ink note, you'll see, look at the commands in the app bar. They're about the ink note. Now if I tap on this image, they're different. So tapping between these two things, I get different commands that are contextually appropriate. And the app bar lets you do that. It gives you a lot of flexibility to show the right commands depending on the context. Another thing the app bar gives you is it's smart about what other things are going on in the system. For example, let's say I tap into this text box here, this text area. The soft keyboard came up, and the app bar moved up automatically. So that's built into the app bar for you. So if you ever have situations where you have text boxes, if you're using the app bar, it'll automatically position itself up when the soft keyboard comes up and things like that. So you don't have to worry about that kind of scenario. So use the app bar as this kind of way to present your commands. It's a really quintessential control. It gives you a lot of these behaviors and interactions built in, but again, has a lot of flexibility for you to present what you need to present there. Another control like that is the flyout control, and we'll look at that in the weather app. So this application here is about showing you the weather. And so you'll see the primary thing they focused on is showing you the weather. Like 100% of the app is showing you the weather. Like Jensen talked about this yesterday. But you still want to do things sometimes like add another city of weather to look at. And so the standard way you do that is by bringing in the app bar. So you swipe from the edge, you get those commands. And now to add a city, there's a little bit more that I need to do. Like I need to tell it what city to add. So what's the right UI to use for that? It's the flyout. So you click Add City, and this little flyout comes up. This is another one of the controls available for you to use. When you use the flyout, one of the things you'll notice is it comes in position correctly. So it's smart about if you're at the edge of the screen, it won't go off the side of the screen and so forth. That's one of the things it gives you. It's very flexible. You can put whatever content you want inside of it. So you can see I've got a text box. I've got a standard button with all those button interactions we were talking about on it, for example. And like the app bar, it's also smart about moving around in response to things. So if I tap on it, it'll move up because the soft keyboard came up. I'm in ink mode still. I'll go back to regular mode. So you get those kind of benefits. And the other benefit you get of it is what we call light dismiss. And what that really means is when we were thinking about what the right ways to present these kinds of secondary actions in applications, one of the things we wanted to avoid was creating kind of a windowing problem for people, where they had to manage panes and windows and close them and open them and position them and so forth. And so we felt that a really great model for most of the time that you'll want to use is what we call light dismiss, where something comes up, and if the user's done with it, they can just tap anywhere else, and it'll just go away. And the flyout has that built into it. So you just use the flyout control, and you get those kinds of behaviors and interactions kind of all built into them. And that's the right kind of control to use for those scenarios. All right. I'm going to show you one more thing in this section, and then we'll wrap things up. I know it's like been a smorgasbord of controls to talk about, but it's fun for me, so you get to listen. All right. The last one I'm going to show you is the tooltip. This is a little one. This is another SDK sample. We'll go to the tooltip one. And this is another one of those controls that follows the touch language. So if you saw JK and Kai's talk, you heard about how press and hold is the right gesture to use for more information. So you shouldn't use tooltips like crazy all over the place, but sometimes you do want to have a little more information for the user, and the tooltip is the right control to use for that. So if I hover with mouse, I get the tooltip, but also if I press and hold, I get the tooltip. It's smart about, it goes away when you move. It's smart about positioning itself, so if you're at the top of the screen, it'll show up below, and so forth. It's smart about the position of your finger, it's another one of the controls kind of available for you to use. One of the things that's a good thing to do with it is something we call scrubbing, and so I just wanted to show that real quick to you, and you can look in the SDK sample to see more about it. But sometimes you have a bunch of like icons or things where there's not a lot of extra textual information about them, but you want to let someone kind of quickly know what's going on there. So if you just press and hold, you get the tooltip, and you can actually implement what we call scrubbing. So I can keep my finger down, scrub over the different elements, and have the tooltip dynamically kind of jump to being the description of that item there. And so that's a common pattern you may want to code in your apps. And the SDK sample shows you how to use the tooltip to do that. All right, so that's a bunch of the controls around commanding surfaces. We showed you the app bar and the flyout. Those are really the controls to use to show more commands on demand. This will be very common across a lot of applications. Take advantage of that to let the main surface of your app be kind of Chrome-free and focus on the main purpose of your app. Tooltip for more info. Using these things, you'll get a consistent, lightweight interaction model, a dismiss model. They work with touch, mouse, and keyboard. They're positioned the right way with system UI comes up when those panes come in from the right, when the soft keyboard comes up. And you have a lot of flexibility with them to put the content you want inside those controls with HTML or XAML. All right, so now let's recap. Good, my little red light is flashing, so we're going to recap. It's perfect timing. What did we talk about today? Windows 8, we've got a new and improved set of controls for making these Metro-style apps for you. Some are old concepts that have been reimagined. Some are whole new concepts. These controls are designed for touch, mouse, and keyboard. They fit into your app's look, yet preserve a common feel, so you can really focus on the scenario that you're doing and the look you want to have for your app. They're native to HTML and native to XAML, so you get a great experience programming them. You can use the skills you know, and your users get a really high-performance, reliable, great user experience when you're using them. And they're really the best way to implement common UI patterns, so you can focus your time on what makes your app great, what makes your app stand out, what makes your app unique. You don't have to spend time re-implementing these common patterns. There are a lot more sessions related to this topic that you might want to go and check out. We have a set of parallel sessions basically for HTML and for XAML. So I didn't do any Visual Studio popping up coding here. There are a bunch of sessions that go do that. These are those sessions. And you can use them to dig into touch is the first set of sessions, so the scroll views and touch and all those kinds of things. On how to use the collection and list controls, so the semantic zoom and the list view and the grid view in HTML or in XAML on how to do data-driven collection. So we didn't talk about how do you get data from the cloud into those list controls. How do you get data from the file system into those list controls? Those are the sessions to go to learn about that. And also, we saw how you can style stuff, but we didn't actually go and code that up. And so there's styling talks you can go to learn about how can you actually visually style these controls in rich ways to have those kind of unique looks you want. And these are those sessions about that. Go check out the SDK samples. Go check out this documentation. There's links from the build app to it. Thank you so much. Pleasure talking with you. I'll hang around here a little bit to answer any questions, and then I'll be available downstairs too. Thanks. Have a great Build conference.